Thank you very much, Guillermo. I would like to thank Guillermo Solana, Paula Luengo, and the Museo Nacional Thyssen-Bornemisza for inviting me as a guest speaker today, and to really congratulate to the Magritte machine exhibition. I think it's magnificent. It really introduces new dimensions to René Magritte, which are important to address and which haven't been addressed before. So I'm sure you all have seen the exhibition, but do go back and have another look, because it is very special. My talk today will focus on an arena of the machinic and the mechanical, which was important for Magritte's artistic production and self-fashioning, namely stage magic, a profession whose practices heavily intersect with cinema. So stage magic and cinema always intersected. Both offer technologies replete with mechanical devices for the production of illusions. It's the significance in Magritte's art of these technologies of illusionism that I want to explore today. So critics have always constructed Magritte, or very often constructed Magritte, as a magician. And we can see this, which is wonderful in this exhibition today as well, that the opening of the exhibition is Magritte as a magician. René Gaffé, in the catalogue of the 1967 Exeter exhibition, The Enchanted Domain, calls him the magician of unforeseen affinities. Marina Warner compared Magritte with the French surrealist leader André Breton, arguing that they were both intellectual magicians with contrasting styles. Whereas Breton is a conjurer who lets nothing slip, she writes, Magritte makes plain his sleights of hand, forcing us to see his riddles as riddles, and never taking pity and allowing a solution. Magic and illusionism flourished in Europe and America around the turn of the 20th century. New scientific discoveries and the rapid development of new filmic and photographic processes stirred popular imagination. So at the turn of the 20th century, there is this real bustling of energy around magic, cinema, illusionism. Such technological innovations both facilitated and necessitated, for reasons of competition, the rapid development of new magical methods, new and spectacular kinds of trickery. The popularity of magic shows in the later 19th century meant that many authors published widely read manuals for amateur magicians, so you could buy suddenly manuals to read about how to do magic at home. These included Howard Thurston's Card Tricks from 1903 and Robert Houdin's Confidences and Revelations, How One Becomes a Magician, first published in 1868 and frequently reprinted around the fin de siècle. This period of flourishing also coincides with Magritte's childhood and youth in Belgium, which at the time was bustling with fairgrounds, fairs, and cinemas. So Belgium is very often seen as, around that time, as very industrial and dark. Actually, it wasn't. It was full of fairgrounds and fairs, and the cinemas were open, and everybody would be in the cinema, and it would be a really communal experience. Magritte was born in 1898, and his family moved in 1913, shortly after his mother's suicide in 1912, to their new home in 41 Rue du Fort in the Walloon city of Charleroi. There he spent a brief but significant period, the last year of his teenagehood, on the cusp of the First World War. The two spaces which emerge as particularly significant in his biographical narratives about this period are only minutes away from his home, and Magritte used to bunk off school quite a lot, so he would hang out in these spaces most of the time. One of them is the Cinéma Bleu on the Rue Neuve, and you can see that parallel to the dotted line. With his brother Paul working at this cinema as a ticket salesman, Magritte had the possibility of visiting film showings whenever he wanted, so he was a lot in the cinema. The other one is the Place du Manège, which regularly hosted circuses and annual fairs. And here you can see a carousel from 1913, and it is actually at the fairground in Charleroi where he meets his future wife, Georgette Magritte. And this could be the carousel because it is in Charleroi in 1913. Magic shows at these fairs and at these fairgrounds were a key element of these spaces. So you would always have a magic show as part of a fair. The importance of magic shows in Belgium at the time is evident from newspaper articles and advertising of the time, which announced fun fairs of the Grande Fête Foraine, typically including, as announced in an advert in La Meuse, for a Liège fun fair of the 5th of June 1909, Grand Théâtre, Théâtre de Marionnettes Liégeois, le Cabaret Voilou, and a Théâtre Magique. Magic shows were included in circus performances. The Cirque des Variétés, as another advert of 18th December 1909 announced in La Meuse, toured the country and showed acrobatic dancers, musicians, singers, comedians, trapeze artists, and other curiosity artists, and importantly, le prestidigitateur mystérieux. During Magritte's childhood, many magicians toured Belgium, for example, Horace Goldin, who took 2-week sellout residencies in Brussels. An article in the Gazette de Charleroi of 8th June 1913 announced the arrival of le plus merveilleux des illusionnistes, together with his 60 collaborators and his tigers, for shows at Brussels Music Hall in the Luna Park. Matinee performances reserved for families were an important part of the success of these magicians, and wealthier children from Brussels and its vicinities, such as Magritte was, would certainly have attended these performances. So I think you get the gist of there was this energy there. And when you're 13, 14, and a young person, this must have affected Magritte in all sorts of interesting ways. Prestidigitation was also a major popular amusement during Magritte's later time in Paris, where he arrived in September 1927. A Paris Soir article of 18th of June 1927 on the perfect prestidigitator elaborates that we now have in France 3,000 conjurers. The significant demography subtly influenced the development of surrealism and related avant-gardes. Paul Gustave van Hecke's multidisciplinary Belgian magazine Variété, to which Magritte was a frequent contributor, clearly alludes in its title to variety shows in circuses and theaters. The magazine contents point to the interests of the Brussels Surrealist group in the popular spaces of the circus, music hall, and magic shows. Its 15th October 1929 issue, furthermore, focused largely on the field of magic, addressing a range of practices from occult magic to stage magic. And here you can see a page from Varietés from this 1929 issue, and you can see Houdini doing all his magic tricks from emerging from a casket or to levitation to a chicken being hypnotized. Early cinema shared close connections with the long-established traditions of illusionism and stage magic. Projection technologies enabled magic tricks and fake séances, and early cinematographers such as Émile and Vincent Isola and Georges Méliès were originally stage magicians. Méliès attended magic shows performances at London's Egyptian Hall, run by Maskelyne and Cook, and the Parisian theatre Robert Houdin, founded by the magician Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin. And you can already see the curtains, the heavy curtains, and the stage-like setting, which you will also see in Magritte's artworks. Méliès added cinema to his theatrical repertoire and directed over 500 films, many of which drew on magic tricks for their remarkably innovative special effects and illusions. The art historian Linda Need notes that Méliès used the full range of magic theater and film trickery to create a visual conversation between the pictorial arts, just as Magritte would in his paintings. Méliès' silent short film, The House of Mystery from 1901, for example, displays a vast treasure box of magic tricks from levitation to skeleton to human transformation. This transformation was echoed by Magritte in his 1935 painting of a skull-headed female nude entitled The Bungler. Magritte would certainly have seen many of Méliès' films, as their popularity ensured them frequent screenings across Europe and America, in fairgrounds and music halls, as well as in cinema. Méliès himself toured Europe, including Brussels in 1910, and his films were often rescreened in Belgium during the war. a special issue of La Revue du Cinéma from 15th of October 1929 and the gala retrospective of Méliès's work in December 1929 at the Salle Pleyel meant that his movies were being rediscovered in France while Magritte was resident in Paris. So they are relevant during his childhood, but also later on when he's a grown-up man. So they come back and he sees these images repeatedly. In Magritte's The Silence of Smiling from 1928, 4 near-identical grinning male heads are suspended against a dark background. This painting was produced around the time of the rediscovery of Méliès's work in France. The 4 suspended heads seem to refer to Méliès's filming of a magic trick in 4 Troublesome Heads from 1898. Featuring one of the first known uses of the special effect of multiple exposure of objects on a black background, this movie shows Méliès as a magician standing between 2 tables. The trick consists of him magically removing one head from his shoulder, another appears as he places the first head on the table. The film ends with 3 identical disembodied heads on the table and the 4th on Méliès's shoulders, leaving 4 troublesome heads, as the film is titled in English. Magritte may well have thought of this silent film when painting The Silence of Smiling. The stable tricks of magic acts take everyday objects out of the familiar context and perform impossible feats with them, making things and people appear or disappear, changing the sizes of things, or apparently defeating gravity by levitation. Magritte employed similar effects in many of his paintings, notably calling them la mise en scène d'objets, the staging of objects, in his systematic search for a disturbing poetic effect. So, of course, magic really does lend itself on all sorts of levels, as you will see from the title, to the magic act itself, to create poetic effects. A painterly imitation of levitation is apparent, for example, in Archimedes' Principle from 1952. In this picture, apples float in defiance of the gravity they confirmed for Newton. Many of Magritte's works refer directly to magic in their titles, such as La Lumière Magique, Le Miroir Magique, La Magie Noire, Les Complices du Magicieux, and La Magique Quotidienne. And these titles you find from 1928 to the 50s, 60s. The titles exploit the connotations of the word magic and its echo of the words image, image, and imagination, imagination, not to mention its repetition of the first 3 letters of the name Magritte. In other instances, Magritte's titles have their rhetorical structure, usually along the lines of the plus adjective plus noun, or the plus noun plus possessive, the style and the poetic resonances of names of magic illusions, advertised on posters and adverts for magic shows. A poster for M. Evanion announces tricks such as les cartes sympathiques, l'œuvre mirobolante, la bougie magique, and les drapeaux d'enchantement, le riz enchante, souvenirs du Japon, les anneaux merveilleux, and la naissance des fleurs. Such titles echo in or are repeated by many of Magritte's own titles, such as La naissance des fleurs from 1929, La vie secrète, Le drapeau noir, Le miroir vivant, La soupçon mystérieux, La preuve mystérieuse, and Souvenir de voyage. The long-term deployment of the rhetoric of magic as a discursive tool to elaborate his concept is clear from an essay titled Leçons de choses, Object Lessons, that Magritte published in 1962 in the journal Rhétorique. Here he discusses the potential for ambiguity in the relationship between image and meaning. Each of the examples he cites depicts one possible set of meanings, while the caption opens and explores the spaces between these possibilities. The first 2 exploit elements of the visual rhetoric of the magician. The one on the, from you, it's on the right. Yeah, the one on the right shows 3 sketches of a magician taking off his head, then taking off his whole head, as does Méliès in 4 Troublesome Heads, then replacing the headed head upside down. The other reproduces Magritte's The Magician, to emphasize how perception can be deceived or diverted, tricked, or simply refused. If the characteristics of mystery, appearance, and disappearance are traits shared by magicians and Magritte, so is the repertoire of objects both employ. Hats, doves, umbrellas, roses, daggers, apples, keys, eggs, candles, mirrors, cages, frames, boxes, cases, and suitcases, tables presenting objects, windows, glasses of water, and screens are all items of equipment used by both magicians and Magritte. All are not coincidentally staple objects in the early 20th century books on magic tricks that Magritte may have read as a child. From 1890 to 93, under the pseudonym Tom Tidd, are for good published with Larousse. Larousse is really important for Magritte. Magritte used the Larousse encyclopedias extensively to take images from them and just copy them one-to-one into his artworks. So Tom Tidd published with Larousse a 3-volume collection of material originally featured in the magazine L'Illusion entitled La Science Amusante. These volumes were very popular, and you can see that popularity in that they were also translated into English in 1891 as an anthology. And here is a page from this English anthology. La Science Amusante popularized the marvels of science. So suddenly science and magic are interacting with each other, and scientific tricks or scientific innovations are shown as magic tricks to make them popular to children. It presented scientific experiments as magic tricks using everyday objects in domestic settings, an iconography familiar from Magritte's own magical scenes. We can see this in the examples here. The magic box trick teases with the very Magrittean question: how would you like to change one object into a totally different one before the eyes of your audience? Make up this magic box and you will be able to do just that. Above this, the large printed heading, "No need for a mirror to reflect life," announces that some of the most baffling tricks invented by famous magicians are based on optical illusions. Using mirrors, magicians can make things seem to appear and disappear. Magritte's mirrors perform similar magical reflections, offering impossible views. In Le Miroir Magique from 1929, we expect to see a reflection of a human being or the viewer in a mirror facing the viewer. Instead, we see the words corps humain, human body, and the mirror becomes a version of the fairy tale mirror that, infallibly honest, offers only intimations of the inevitable mortality of those who gaze into it. In La Reproduction Interdite in 1937, a reversed portrait of the British surrealist and collector Edward James faces a mirror reflecting not the face we, viewing him from behind, cannot see. Instead, we see a repetition of the back of the man's head. The mirror displays what we can already and only see. As is the case with all magicians, containers are important in Magritte's practice. Examples range from boxes and other encasements in his images to the bottles on which he painted. These elements present us with a series of magical stage setups, preparing the viewer for a performance of aesthetic prestidigitation. These stages are reminiscent of the stage of the magic performance, its wooden floor and velvet curtains, connoting in turn the magic theater of the 19th century. Magritte uses the props of the magicians and their techniques to perform the painterly illusion of making ordinary objects extraordinary. So once we have the elements of technique, props, and stage, we also need the most important item, and that is the magician himself. Magritte's self-constructions in various autobiographical fragments emphasize the magical at key moments and as key characteristics in his portrayal of himself. Of one formative moment in his autobiography, Magritte narrates, and I quote, "One night in 1936, I awoke in a room in which one had placed a cage with a bird which has fallen asleep. A magnificent error allowed me to see in the cage the vanished bird and an egg which had replaced it. The bird vanishing in a cage is a staple magic trick. Here's an example from La Science Amusante. Sleeping and waking, seeing and vanishing, placing and replacing indicate the structure of perception, the magnificent error that fascinates the artist. For Magritte, the bird-egg revelation became the beginning of his research, which was an attempt to solve a problem. The narrative plays out in two paintings. Les Affinités Électives, Elective Affinities, painted in 1933, before his apparent epiphany of 1936, and La Clairvoyance from 1936, a self-portrait of the artist in the act of painting a bird on a canvas while observing an egg. The painted bird here is a version of an earlier painting from 1935, as well as a one-to-one adaptation of a Larousse illustration of a Rossignol de Mureil, a nightingale, in a chart of Oiseau Utile. You can see the nightingale in the corner over there. And it would be very interesting to actually look at why Magritte picked this one specifically rather than any of the others. The turning of an egg into a bird and vice versa is an established magic trick, which comes in many variations, such as the hatchet bird trick, where, as described in the boy's own conjuring book from 1857, a live canary is hidden in a hollowed egg and then revealed. And such tricks were also staple in cinematic illusions. And they were sometimes in real magic shows, they were quite bloody because the sleeping bird was really dead, so they killed the birds during the trick. The turning of an egg into a bird and vice versa is an established magic trick, which comes in many variations. The popularity of similar bird-egg illusions tricks can also be traced in a poster promoting the Great Nesbit Mysteries, The Giant's Breakfast from circa 1920. Based on a David Devant illusion, the black shadow of the magician in this poster points to a giant egg sitting in a cage-like structure. The eggshell is broken on top and a fully grown bird peeps out at the viewer. Magritte's Elective Affinities, on the left, with its giant egg in a case, is remarkably similar to this representation of a magic trick, while the magician egg-bird arrangement recalls that of La Clairvoyance, the picture on the right, in which Magritte constructs himself as a prestidigitator, pointing like the great Nesbit, but with his own magic wand, the paintbrush, at his object of magic. The shattered picture or mirror frame in the Great Nesbit poster is also interesting, so you can see that picture frame above and the shattered mirror. It evokes another recurrent motif of Magritte, evident in works like The Key of the Fields from 1936, which is the cover image of the beautiful Magritte machine catalogue. Magritte's The Healer of 1937 seems to be a self-portrait as conjurer. He replaces the body of a seated male figure with a bird cage containing doves, next to him a mysterious bag, perhaps a bag of tricks. Over the cage is draped a red theatrical curtain, recalling magic acts in which birds and cages are made to disappear. Magritte represents himself as prestidigitator in Le Sorcier, the Magician, of 1951, a painting in which the influence of cinematic imagery and techniques clearly overlaps with that of stage magic. The painting shows Magritte taking a meal. Formally dressed, his arms and hands have multiplied to show in a single image various movements of eating and drinking simultaneously, emphasizing in a comic way the magician's ambidexterity. The painting condenses the frame-by-frame cinematic image of narrative sequentiality, transforming an image of motion into one of stillness. The depiction of his own painterly sleight of hand, an allegory of his creativity as an artist, is remarkably similar to a poster advertising a performance in 1930 of the Italian-born illusionist Rudy. Famous for his sleight of hand tricks, Rudy played to audiences across Europe. The poster shows a simulated time-lapse effect of Rudy's hand movement, emphasizing his skill with sleight of hand techniques. We see the magician in profile, looking at his hand. Not unlike Magritte's 1928 painting, The Mysterious Suspicion, and a scene from Buñuel and Dalí's 1929 film, Un chien andalou. Magritte's self-reflexive use of the magician's iconography is evident in a photograph of himself with his 1927 Fantomas painting Le Barbare. This photograph was taken in 1938 at his first one-man show in London, and it is the only record of the painting, which together with several others by Magritte was destroyed during the first bombing raid on London. The painting draws on the famous image of Fantomas. In a top hat, an image derived from the cover illustration of the writers Marcel Alain and Pierre Souvestres' 1911 novel, which was prominently advertised in Belgian newspapers, such as in Le Peuple, on 16th March 1911. And Magritte was 13 at this time, so you can imagine if you're a little kid and you are leafing through a very boring newspaper with all this text, and suddenly Fantomas is nearly jumping out of the pages. Le Barbare shows only Fantomas' face, staring back at the viewer. He's wearing a top hat and suit, and seems to dissolve into the brick wall behind him. In the photograph, a bowler-hatted Magritte mimes the posture of Fantomas. Both wear the formal clothing, particularly the top hat of the magician, style conventions introduced by Robert Houdin. So Houdin came up with that actually the magician should wear a top hat and should be dressed very dapper. The photograph displays several stage magical connotations. Magritte clearly identifies with the character in the painting, transforming the photograph into a kind of double self-portrait. The painting shows Fantomas staring back at us, effectively performing, as he repeatedly does in the Fantomas stories, a disappearing act in plain view. So Fantomas always disappears. There are sequences where he's imprisoned, the prison is locked, and he still, like Houdini, disappears. He both appears and disappears in this image, the artist becoming part of his artistic work, the subject of his own magic act. The magician's skill in Magritte's paintings is located in its evident staging, with the deception of the viewer in plain sight. This applies to individual images and also to the oeuvre as a whole, in which prestidigitation is apparent everywhere. Magritte knows this, explaining in a comment, which itself could come from a guidebook for magic tricks, everything we see hides another thing. We always wish to see what is hidden by what we see. The real trick in Magritte, we might say, is the importance of painterly prestidigitation, of pictorial trickery, as a significant, theoretically supported procedure in his work. His oeuvre becomes an extended application of these tricks, a lifelong magic act in which Magritte, the performer, repeatedly disappears. This vanishing is performed in full view, and yet is consistently able to deceive the viewer into attempting to look beyond what is on display in search of some concealed truth. So Magritte always teases you to, come on, look beyond. Of course, there is nothing beyond the painting. This performance has the added value of shifting Magritte, the artist, closer to Magritte, the entertainer, cementing his explicit rejection of bourgeois culture in a repositioning of the status of the artist and of his works away from conventional roles. Similarly, Alain and Souvestres' Fantomas narratives, as literary scholar Mathieu Letourneux points out, consciously participate in a popular culture far away from any legitimate field of culture. As Letourneux demonstrates, stage magic is a fundamental aspect of the Fantomas narrative. So Alain and Souvestres actually heavily draw on stage magic tricks, for the Fantômas narratives. It appears often within the storyline, and Alain Souvestre called the file in which press clippings informing the Fantômas stories were kept the box of tricks. Not a contemporary magic trick. Amongst the press clippings, Letourneux found a complete catalogue of the Maison Horace Herme, a Provence shop specializing in prestidigitation and offering the prices of magic devices, including Siamese handcuffs, an articulated skeleton, a holder for flying candles and obedient padlocks, and a complete set of traps. And here is an example of an earlier pre-1910 catalog. So the 1913 catalog is just an updated version of this. And I wanted to show it to you as I was struck by one of the tricks, which is called La Parapluie Enchantée, which seems again to demonstrate the overlaps between names and objects of magic tricks, and Magritte's work and titles, such as Le Domaine Enchanté, but also, of course, his umbrellas. Letourneux concludes, and I quote, "The deceptions conceived by Fantômas, whether a fake hanging with an ingested tube, a real decapitation for an actress on stage, or corpses used as dummies, are the macabre props of a magical show." Magritte's relationship with the ever-vanishing Fantômas works as a conduit for other aspects of his magician persona. This enables us to link specific works to the iconography of the magical, as seen in advertising and promotional material on the walls of Paris and Belgium during the 1920s. So these magic posters would have appeared all over the place on the walls. I'm sure you are also still familiar. Sometimes it still happens with circus posters, but certainly in my childhood, these circus posters, fair posters were very important aspects. A poster from circa 1922 to 1924 shows the music hall illusionist Harry Cameron, known as Carmo, who toured Paris and Brussels in the 1920s and 1930s and was particularly famous for disappearing acts. In the poster, Carmo's body seems to fade, revealing the brick wall behind him. As Patrick Hughes has noted, this fading resembles that of Fantômas, fades in Magritte's Le Barbare. This illusion, named Pepper's Ghost Effect, after its creator John Henry Pepper, was often performed in theaters, amusement parks, carnival sideshows, and fairs, which Magritte, of course, often frequented as a boy. One element of the Pepper's Ghost Effect involves the appearance on the magician or clairvoyant's command of ghostly objects and people fading in or out of the room, or transforming into different things. This specific image of Pepper's ghost effect may have inspired Magritte's 1943 painting La Gravitation Universelle, where the arm of a hunter, based on a photograph of his fellow Belgian surrealist co-conspirator Louis Coutener, vanishes into a brick wall. These disappearances and transformations are, of course, recurring themes in Magritte's work from 1927 onwards. Attempting the impossible, another self-portrait depicts the artist seemingly painting his partner Georgette into existence. In this painting, Magritte plays Pygmalion to Georgette's Galatea. The Pygmalionesque awakening to life of a representation was another popular magic trick of the time, invented by David Devant, often referred to as the greatest magician of all time, first performed in 1893 and known as the artist's dream. So you can see the title of the trick on the bottom. The mechanism involved was devised and constructed by Maskelyne and performed at the Egyptian Hall in London in 1893. In this illusion, a painting of the magician's apparently dead accomplice is brought back to life, as if dreamed into reality by her partner. We can also witness the animation of the image stepping out of its frame in Magritte's The Light of Coincidence from 1933, where a ghostly torso seems to leave its picture frame, and this painting is also in the exhibition, and it was wonderful to see it there. A related trick, spirit painting or tableau animé, was also popular around the same time, performed around 1900 by magicians such as Professor Hermann and depicted in posters by showing a living woman emerging from a painted frame, a magical setting also staged in a 1928 photograph of Magritte in front of attempting the impossible. And you can see again how the paintbrush becomes this kind of magic wand. And also in Dr. Hermann's poster, the paintbrush becomes blurred with the magic wand, which conjures up the woman. The Pepper's ghost effect trick was also extensively used in conjuring acts and seances to create a highly lucrative illusion of bringing the dead back to life. Cupboards, cabinets, and coffins are key props in these versions of the trick. A poster of circa 1891 promoting Harry Keller's famous spirit cabinet reads, "Keller and his perplexing cabinet mysteries." We can trace the influence of cabinets in stage magic on the surrealist interest in the Cabinet of Curiosities, as well as in many of Magritte's paintings. In Memoriam, Max Sennett from 1936 clearly resembles the depiction of Keller's half-open spirit cabinet. And a poster from around 1900 promoting Europe's latest, De Orme's Marvelous Mysteries, depicting ghosts, devils, and a nightgown-clad female spirit emerging from a cupboard or cabinet. Another poster from circa 1915 and published in Berlin by Weiland and Bauschwitz announces the trick of the Mysterious Catacombs, die mysteriösen Katakomben. The poster depicts a kind of parody of pictorial representation, in which open coffins constitute picture frames containing images that come alive, the catacomb itself becoming a kind of ghoulishly reanimated art gallery, and indeed there are unframed pictures visible on the walls of the catacombs in the background. Amidst the trappings of grisly resurrection rituals, a copy of das Buch des Todes, the Book of Death, lies open in the foreground. We see several open coffins containing human bodies in a variety of conditions, indicated by captions: a skeleton stepping out of the coffin, corpse is both fully dressed in an evening suit, ist wiederbelebt, enshrouded for the grave, stirbt, and a skeleton with a living head arising from the coffin, der Kopf belebt. An image, again, reversed by Magritte's The Bungler. The poster announces Experimente gemacht mit einer Person aus dem Publikum, experiments made with a person from the audience. The language echoes Magritte's rhetoric of experimentation, which he employed, for example, in the opening remarks to his London lecture, delivered as part of the Young Belgian Artists exhibition at the London Gallery in March 1937. And Magritte states, I'm quoting him, "Ladies and gentlemen, in the experiment we are about to make together, I hope to demonstrate certain characteristics of words, images, and real objects." A version of the trope of confinement in a coffin-like container can be seen in the famous Houdinesque painting The Reckless Sleeper of 1928, who is depicting lying peacefully asleep in a wooden box that floats in mid-air. A variety of magical and typically Magrittean objects, including an apple, a burning candle, a dove, a bow, and a mirror, seem to be fixed in a strange stony mass located below him. This image of a sleeper recalls posters for the illusionist Garvin, who appears in a 1926 advertisement attending a large box containing his assistant, demonstrating an appearance-disappearance illusion, while elsewhere in the image the assistant is depicted emerging from a transparent. Magritte's paintings explore the relations between image and frame and offer an extended commentary on pictorial issues of freedom and constraint, containment and escape, these being, of course, popular tropes of the illusionist's performance, especially in the guise of the escapologist. Magritte's paintings explore the relationship between image and frame, as I said, and in The Eternally Obvious from 1930, a life-size model of a female nude, a portrait of Georgette, is assembled out of 5 separately framed paintings. Magritte repeated this trope in 2 later paintings using different models. The painting's illusion relies on the eye's ability to perceive the figure as complete despite its fragmentation. The dismembered body is thus reassembled in the viewer's perception. This work is a direct allusion to another magic trick known as the Aztec lady, in which a magician apparently sews apart his female assistant's body in a box and then magically reassembles it. The origins of this trick are murky. Robert Houdin mentions it in his 1858 memoirs, but the first widely publicized performance of this kind of sewing illusion was in London in January 1921 by the British magician P.T. Selbit. In this trick, which Selbit named, with disarming literalism, sewing through a woman, his assistant Betty Barker was apparently locked inside a wooden crate. A different version of female dismemberment can be seen in a 1925 poster advertising the great Nicholas trick of seeing through a woman, where a woman apparently remains alive while her torso is removed. These performances recall works such as Magritte's The Magician's Accomplices from 1926. Here, a female nude is encased from her armpits upwards in a golden cylinder. In the foreground, another cylinder at stage level reveals what is hidden by the previous one, arms, shoulders, and head of another, the same female nude. The wooden floor and red curtain create a stage-like setting, so you can again see this stage-like, magic stage-like setting with the red curtain and the wooden floor. The date of this painting coincides with a French news article in Le Journal Amusant on Horace Golding's performance at the Paris Opera Music Hall. And I quote, "The magician Horace Golding shows us a series of very adroitly presented tricks. He continues to sew into a pretty blonde who is not in too much pain." A final magical trope commonly alluded to by Magritte is that of aerial suspension or levitation, a popular theme of posters advertising magic shows. In many of Magritte's paintings, we see inanimate objects such as bells, apples, glasses, or bread floating in the air. And in this version of The Lovers from 1928, a woman in a red dress kisses a disembodied male head suspended beside her. This painting seems to draw on a version of a disembodied male head we can find in a poster image of the magician, the Great Nesbit, from circa 1920, whose act used electricity to create spectacular illusions. One of Magritte's earliest manifestations of aerial suspension can be seen in the androgynous body, corpse or dummy, we are not sure, floating across the foreground of the Musings of a Solitary Walker from 1926, a painting often associated with Magritte's mother's suicide. Yet perhaps a more productive point of origin are levitation tricks, as we can see here in a 1919 poster advertising the illusionist von Arx. Historians of stage magic often overlook the fact that most magicians work with an accomplice or an assistant, just as art historians and art histories have often repressed or simply omitted the collaborative input of female partners to the works of male artists, constructing them instead as muses who inspire but contribute little else to the man's work. Georgette Magritte's contribution to creating many of her partner's works has likewise been often overlooked by critics. And actually, in this exhibition, it is absolutely magnificent that when you enter the exhibition, on the right you encounter the photographs of Magritte together with Georgette. And this is very rare, again, to see that in an exhibition. And one of the exhibition posters is, of course, of Georgette with the two doves. Yet her extensive work with Magritte is particularly visible when viewed in relation to the significance of stage magic and prestidigitation in his works, enabling us to see her as a crucial and active professional partner contributing fully to Magritte's magic. Traditionally, the relations between model and artist are presented as hierarchical. The model-artist dichotomy reproducing the conventional female-male stereotype of active, passive, controlling, controlled, creator, created. Yet Georgette's prominence as figure and subject in Magritte's paintings indicates the closeness of the professional relationship. She posed for most of Magritte's nudes, and from 1923 he portrayed her throughout his career. Her insistent presence in these paintings suggests we consider her contribution to Magritte's artistic productivity as resembling that of the magician's accomplice or assistant. She first appears in this role in Reclining Nude of 1928, where her stiff posture and staring gaze evoke stage magic acts using hypnotism, while a variety of objects are balanced like performance props on her body. This painting's allusion to representations of magic acts are reinforced by its historical proximity to Attempting the Impossible, painted soon after and depicting Georgette as the assistant who plays the materializing figure in the images riffing on the Pepper's ghost effect illusion. This materialization-dematerialization trope returns in many representations of her figure, dissolving into seascapes in the background, as is the case in paintings like Black Magic from 1934. Georgette's role as the magician's assistant and accomplice is also visually established by images Magritte produced from the early 1940s onwards, representing her posing with doves. In a second version of The Break in the Clouds from 1942, she appears nude, looking at a dove landing on her left hand while holding what seems to be a ball or an egg in her right. Her environment is that of the magician's stage, heavy curtains on the right, and a burning fire accompanying her pose. And this poster is the very poster from the exhibition. So, in a 1938 photograph of Georgette by Magritte titled Le Rendezvous, she sits with crossed arms holding two doves, as if presenting them to us as part of a magic act. A 1947 photograph shows her in profile, offering the audience a leaf and a glass of water, further props of an apparent conjuring trick. The visual trope of the magician, with his accoutrements floating suspended around him, can be seen in many posters advertising magic acts. A 1920 poster for Brush the Mystic represents him surrounded by floating roses, playing cards, doves, and a multitude of other objects that swirl mysteriously at his apparent command from the genie's lamp in front of him. Magritte adapted this familiar trope in several portraits of Georgette, such as in these two paintings, the top from 1935 and the bottom from 1937. The trope is particularly clear in the latter, where Georgette's portrait is set conventionally in an internal frame resembling a locket portrait, surrounded by similar collections of objects: dove, key, candle, glove, a branch, a piece of paper with the word vague written upon it. So, this survey of Magritte's pictorial and conceptual relations to traditions of popular magical performance and stage illusionism connects his surrealism to popular cultural traditions and to experiences encountered in the artist's childhood. The magician, the trick, the stage, the accoutrements of magic, and the accomplice all are key features of stage magic traditions, as they are also of Magritte's art. Magritte's borrowings from and echoings of the visual aesthetics of stage illusionism, its visually seductive performances, as well as its enticing advertisement and promotion, indicate new levels of complexity to his work, which, with the flourish of a magician's cape, both reveal and conceal their secrets. And thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you.